business. Now I'm an author, that's how I survive, that's how I got my money to pay my rent. But people don't know me the most is because you probably are aware, please.
Fajitas and a vegetable fried rice.
Fajitas and vegetable fried rice. So you should know this if you're vegan, that in the UK it is unlawful to discriminate against a vegan. It is unlawful to harass a vegan, and it is unlawful to victimize a vegan. And that in any situation that is an interaction with humans, such as in a workplace or in the provision of services, both public and private, in the landlord-tenant relationships. And this is the only country in the world where that happens. This is the only country that veganism is protected under the Equality Act as a protected characteristic. And that's what I'm known for, because I'm the person that achieved that. I was fired as a vegan, I took my employer to court, and I won after 2 years of litigation. And because I won, they incorporated veganism into the Equality Act. And that made veganism in the UK, in fact Great Britain, because the Equality Act doesn't apply in Northern Ireland, but technically they just follow everything. So technically it's Great Britain. So the Great Britain is the only jurisdiction where veganism is recognized as a protected belief, as important, no less, than any other belief or religion, and it has the same level of protection that would be marital status, sexual orientation, disability, all that in the Equality Act. And because we are the only ones that have that, my case became very famous and very popular, and there was a lot of people and media interested in my case. When I won, that was in 2020, the few months after that, I just checked how many articles were written about my case, and there were 1,700 articles in 68 different countries talking about my case. So it's one of the stories of veganism that has circulated most, because either people hated it, then we got the protection and they wrote about it, or they loved it, then we got the protection and they wrote about it. But everybody had an opinion about it. And for a while, that was, I was known, my picture was not on the front page, but in the papers, to the point that it was overwhelming for me just to look at any paper. And that, what happens is immediately after I won, a publisher approached me and said, you need to write a book about how you did it. And I thought about it, and I said, well, actually, I'm not bad about writing books, because I had written a novel before, but I had forgotten about it. But then I thought, well, I've been trying to read books about veganism that I cannot find. For instance, I wanted to read a book about which type of vegans there are, how many types there are, another about the vegan world of the future, how it would look like, or the history of veganism, how the whole thing happens. And I thought, I should write these books, because if they don't exist, somebody should read them. So I approached the publisher and said, look, I'll write my book about my legal case if you allow me to write my book about all the other things I wanted to write. And perhaps this is the only chance I'm going to get. So I want to write about my legal case, the history of veganism, all these other things in a single book. And she said, fine. And this book is this one, Ethical Vegan, a personal and political journey to change the world, which was published in December 2020, and my legal case was successful in January 2020. So a book that should have taken me 2 years to write, I wrote it in a few months. Why? You know why? COVID, so I had nothing else to do. So I was stuck at home with nothing else to do. I said, okay. I wrote about, I'm autistic, by the way, so I have this ability to focus on something and don't give up. And then 3 weeks later, where I am. So I wrote an average of 13 hours per day, every day during the entire year. And I presented my manuscript to the publisher. Said, wow, look, and you get it, you'll see there is these 3 stories intertwined. One is the story of my life, how I became a vegan. The other is the story of my legal case and all the details, because it was a 2 years litigation and it took me quite a long time, and I could not pay the lawyers. It's all like a thriller, a story like a thriller. And then the story of veganism as a whole, so how veganism started and everything. It all intertwined, so you don't know you start reading one of the stories, and then stop, goes to the other one, then stop, goes. So you can't just read one. You need to read the entire book to get to the end of the story. So I did that on purpose. So now what I'm going to tell you is a little bit of one of these three stories, which is the story of how I became vegan, which is part of that book, and I'll give you a bit of a short version of it. First of all, well, I mentioned my name and I mentioned my accent. Any idea where I might be coming from when I was born?
Scotland.
Oh. There's not a completely wrong answer. It's wrong, but there is something that the Scottish have that the people that I grew up with have too, which is a sense of independence.
Catalonia.
I'm Catalan, so exactly. I'm from Catalonia. Jordi is a Catalan name. It's George in Catalan. And Casamitjana means the middle house. So I'm George who lives in the house, middle house in the coast. And but I've been here most of my adult life, and I emigrated here more than 30 years ago. But when I grew up, it was in the 60s. And Catalonia always been struggling to get independence from Spain, and many times successfully, and then they invade us again, then become independent, they invade us again. And when I grew up, when I was born, was one of the worst times that we had, because the last time we were independent, fascist general Francisco Franco attacked the Catalans and the Basque and won, and for 40 years they had a fascist dictatorship. In the last 12 years of that, I was born. So I was born in a world where Catalonians were illegal. So my name was a forbidden name. My Catalan clothes forbidden, songs forbidden, the language, we speak a different language, was forbidden. That's how I grew up. And that actually helped me later to become vegan, make it easy for me. Because eventually Franco died of an old age. Franco, Mussolini, and Hitler were the three fascists. But Franco didn't join in the Second World War. So Mussolini and Hitler were killed in the Second World War. Franco survived and died of an old age 40 years later. So that's why I was born. And when most people that live those fascists are dead now, but people like me in Catalonia still remember because that was 40 years later. So the good thing was that when he died, and the whole thing changed. Democracy began. Political parties were legal before. The Catalan language was made legal, not just legal, so you compulsory, you had to learn it, completely changed. And when you grew up in a world that everything seems wrong, and then suddenly in your own life see a turn that completely improves the situation, that gives you hope as a vegan, trying to build the vegan world. When we look the world around and we think, well, that's so bad, it's quite discouraging, thinking, well, what can I do? But if you have experienced a completely change politically and socially in a group, then you know we can do it too. So it is possible to change the world, the current world, and to become the world. Please? Katie? So it helped me in this regard. The other thing that helped me is that being from an oppressed culture, because the animals, the non-human animals, are the most oppressed of all. And one of the things that we vegans do, we empathize. We recognize that the oppression matters. So if you have been oppressed for any reason, that process is easier. So the fact that I remember being oppressed, I remember walking on the street, I was probably 7, and I was talking Catalan with a friend, and somebody stopped me and took me apart and shouted me speaking Christian, because that's how they used to say it, saying Spanish is the Christian language, Catalan is the barbaric language. And I remember me crying, going to the school, not understanding what had happened, because I was still 7 and I didn't understand the politics. So, and we couldn't even meet. I remember the police coming and arresting everybody from the church because they had stayed more than 10 minutes after the Mass. And meeting in public places was illegal. So and that was an illegal meeting after the Mass. Imagine living like that. I was learning playing music and Catalan songs that were illegal, so we had somebody in the window looking for passers-by. Every time that somebody passed by, we changed the song to Spanish, and then the person disappeared, and carried on in Catalan. That's how I grew up. So when all this changed, it really kind of made me realize we can change the world. The world is changeable. We can do things like that. And yeah, the animals suffer as I remember being oppressed, so therefore I get it. I completely get it. So it did help me. But it also made me very scared of people, to be honest. And also being autistic, I didn't know at the time I was autistic, even more, I'm scared of people, especially the police, the Spanish police, they all have mustaches, they all wear grey uniforms. We call them the grey people. And that was the thing that terrified me the most, the grey people. So it was traumatic from that point of view. But what happened is I decided, well, I don't really want to be around human beings. They seem very hostile creatures. I prefer other creatures, dogs and cats. So my family had dogs and cats, and I slept with the dog at the floor. I prefer it to be. I never had this relationship of masters. We were siblings, literally siblings. And then I thought, what can I do that as a profession that doesn't involve looking at any human being, because that's invented. And I thought, I can be a biologist. I can go to the countryside and just be with animals all day. How that is called? Oh, it's called zoology. That's what I want to be. So from a young age, and autistics, we do have these subjects of interest. And my subject of interest was animals. It became my obsession. And then I discovered there was a degree, a career, and I became a zoologist. And I was just doing my degree, a 5 years degree, which is at the time they were longer than now. Now normal degrees are 3 years. At the time they were 5 years. The first 3 years was I became a biologist, and then the next two I became a zoologist. And in the middle of my 5 year degree, I had to do a dissertation about some animals, and I wanted to have a good marks for that. And I thought, well, rather than just do a bibliographic work, I want to do some field research and add it to it, because I want to stand up among everybody else, because that was my vocation. I wanted to have good grades. And I asked one of my professors if that was a good idea. He said, yes. Which animals could you do? And he mentioned, well, I saw a wasp nest the other day in the campus. It's just close by. Perhaps you can do wasp, because everybody hates wasp. Nobody wants to study wasp. And who runs from wasp? So it's going to be no much competition if you choose wasp as your subject. I said, fine, I'll do that. And I found the nest, and I am an ethologist. Ethologists are specialized zoologists that study animal behavior in the wild. So we don't do experiments, we just observe animals. Because many animals you can't observe them because it's difficult. Wasps is difficult. But this genus or species of wasp, they are easier because they don't cover their nest with a paper bag. Normally the nest are a kind of a cover and a hole at the bottom of it. These ones, they don't have the cover, so you see all the cells from the outside. So you can actually observe it. So that was a good idea. But so I look at these species, and I approached to the place. The first day I had to do my research with a notebook, not very apprehensive because they sting. They can't sting you. And I knew one thing. I knew that when they had nests inside cavities, and there's a hole in the cavity, they would leave guards outside to protect the entrance. And this one was inside a brick structure, so it had a hole. So what I knew is that I had to pay attention to the guards, because the guards would be the ones that would raise the alarm. If they see a threat, they will raise the alarm. And how they do it? They relieve a pheromone, a scent, that says alarm, somebody's approaching, danger. And then everybody comes out and stings whoever is around. And if whoever is first and see somebody else, when they sting it, in the sting, there is the same pheromone that says, or a different version, that says, sting me. So that's why all wasps always sting the same person that's been stung once. Because you're basically saying to all the wasps, sting me, sting me. That's why you need to run away. I knew that, so I knew that if they stung me, they will go all after me. But I had an advantage. I knew that you could actually see the moment that they release the pheromone. It's a quarter of a second. It's a very fast thing. They move the wing in a way, they open it like that for a quarter of a second, and that's the moment. So I had to pay attention. Being autistic helped me to focus enough for this detail that most people would not be able to see that. So I approached very slowly. My heart was kind of pumping. And at one point, the guard saw me. With the antenna, I could see that she was moving, smelling me, the smell of the antenna. She turned. They have a face. This was, bees have a head, but these particular wasps have a flat face, so they can turn and they look around like we do, so you can see when they look at you. So they immediately look at me, immediately smell me, and started to move the wings, and I was just ready to get my notebook up and just intercept as many wasps as possible and then run. And then the most extraordinary thing happened that completely changed my mind and made me the vegan that I am today. She judged me and she said, "You're all right, you're okay, you can watch." She completely relaxed, and that 1 inch, still my skin gets goosey every time I remember, because she judged me much better than any human I had encountered up to that point. 1 inch individual everybody hates and everyone wants to kill completely judged me with my demeanor and my behavior that I was someone that was not a threat and it was okay for me to. And that blew my mind. I could not believe I just met someone like that was fairer than any human I had met before. And I realized I can't be just a scientist that observes the animals. I have to dedicate my life to protect them, because it's so unfair the way we treat them. It's so clever, this individual. He obviously knows more about life than any human I met. And yet we treat them as nothing. Immediately I realized how bad was how we treat everyone, and immediately I realized I have to spend my life trying to protect it. I don't know how, but I will try to do it. And since then, I started to rescue. Every time there was a nest and people wanted to kill it, I would just go and rescue them and take them all alive and translocate into something. So I've been rescuing every time 10,000 wasps, 20,000 wasps. I became known as the waspman. People knew me as the waspman that day. Even the police came to my house sometimes because there was a wasp somewhere, was nest, and they would send me with the sirens, and all the village would vacate, and I would just go by myself with no cover. Because I learned the language. I studied them 10 years. I learned how to judge the situation. They judge me, I learned to judge them, and I could negotiate. And I was stung 6 times in 10 years, which is nothing. And all of them I deserve it. I did wrong things. But what also meant is that I was disillusioned with the whole academic work. And I thought, I can just be staying here and be a researcher. I want to be a protectionist and a zoologist, and I cannot do it here. In Catalonia at the time, the profession of animal protectionist didn't exist. So therefore, I thought, I need to find another place. I know in other places you can be both a scientist and an animal protectionist. I don't know where, but I know that it is not here. So therefore, I left all my possessions, and I took everything I had in a bag in the front and a bag in the back. And I walk out of Catalonia trying to find a place when they would need a zoologist and an animal protectionist, completely blind. And so I went through France, that didn't work. Through Belgium, didn't work. Through Netherlands, didn't work. To Germany, didn't work. To Denmark, didn't work. And then I came here. And it did work. Immediately when I came here to the UK, I understood, these people do have animal protection people, and they do have salaries. That's a profession. They do like science. They do like, because every time I ask people ask me, what do you do? Oh, I study wars. In many countries said what? In the UK they said war. And that completely changed my judgment of the whole nation. But of course I didn't speak English at all. So this language you hear in me, that's my 4th language. So I didn't speak at all, so I had to spend my first years as an immigrant doing the worst possible jobs in London, obviously. And every time what I did is in summer, I would hitchhike through the UK, everywhere, UK and Ireland, and Scotland and everything, and every car they stopped me, I asked, do you know anywhere they need a zoologist? And no, fine. Do you know, I did the entire British Islands, and the last part I did, Cornwall, and one of the cars, I asked, do you know anyone that needs a zoologist? They said, yes, we do. There is a monkey sanctuary in Cornwall that probably they might need a zoologist. Fine, I'll go there. I went to the monkey sanctuary, volunteered for a while, for a week, and the last week I told them, this was a primate sanctuary in Cornwall, it's called Lou. In Lou, it's called the monkey sanctuary there. It was called the monkey sanctuary there, it's called Wild Futures now. But at the time, today they have many monkeys, but at the time they only have one monkey, one species of monkey, the Amazonian woolly monkey. And their dream was to take them back home to the Amazon. They were all ex-pets that had been rescued. And when I looked around, I thought about it, and I gave a speech at the end of the dinner, the day before I had to leave, saying, please hire me, I will take the monkeys back to the Amazon for you. And I declared that I had a plan, I could do it. And they did hire me. And that was my first job as an animal protectionist. And I have worked since always as an animal protectionist, all my life. So that it did work. Eventually I found a place, and since then I moved to other places. I went to Brazil many times, and I learned Portuguese, and just in order to find places to take the monkeys. This is a whole story, you will find it in my book. But basically I spent jumping from subject to subject. From the postman, I became the monkey man for a few years, people know me as that. Then I became the zoo man. Then I became a zoo man when I started to campaign against zoos. I worked with the Boundary Foundation and I started to campaign against zoos. I closed 5 zoos. So it's not an easy thing to do, to close something that already exists. And through my work, I closed 5 zoos. One of them, Glasgow Zoo, a big, enormous zoo. It's not tiny, it's the other way tiny. But this Glasgow Zoo was big. In fact, if you go to Glasgow Zoo Wikipedia page, that tells you about the old Glasgow Zoo, my name comes up. That's the guy that messes with that. So, and I was quite successful. Everything I was doing, I became for a while the expert of that, and then moved to the next one. Then I became an anti-hunting expert. I went to work for the League Against Cruel Sports first. I worked twice. And the first time, well, that was when the Hunting Act was passed. And I was the first successful prosecutions against a hunt of a violation of the Hunting Act were mine. So I did the first successful prosecutions, and the second and the third. And then I trained people to prosecute the hunts, and I had investigators. Then I became an undercover investigator myself. I went undercover to different subjects, including often wild animal related, like the pet trade, the exotic pet trade, the parrot pet trade, things like that. And it was freelance. People hired me to do another investigation, and then I would do a report. I did an investigation on pet shops, and I did an investigation on aquaria, in zoos for a while. And well, I kept doing this. And you'll see all the details in my book. But at one point, I returned it to the League Against Cruel Sports. I worked twice, first as a hunting campaigner, then 10 years later as a head of policy and research, in a higher position. And that was in 2016. And when I joined them, being I forgot an important part before the part. So, during the first years of this animal protection campaign, I still was eating meat. I still was not even a vegetarian. And at one point, this changed. And that was in my zoo part of the world, when I was the zoo man, working for the Boundary Foundation. Zoo Check was a department that I was running, the Zoo Check department. And that meant going to investigate zoos and do exposés of zoos and then do reports about them. And I was really a workaholic, working hard. And the Boundary Foundation at the time had a building of 3 floors. And I was going up and down the building, and I was rushing, and because there was a journalist waiting for my footage of a lion I had filmed, and I tripped going down the stairs. And I was going to fall in on my body straight down and probably break many things. But I had the agility to be able to propel myself with my hands in the handrail in order to move my legs further and aiming to land on my feet rather than on my stomach. But I overdid it, and I went too high, and I crashed my head on the ceiling. So the ambulance came, I lost my conscience, and when the paramedics woke me up, the first thing I said to them is, I had an amazing dream. And then they stopped me. They said, okay, you tell me later, but how many fingers can you see, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't know this, but when you are unconscious from trauma, you also dream. It's not just when you sleep. And I had a dream while I was unconscious. But after he made all the things I had to do, I forgot it completely. I knew it was an amazing dream, but I had no recollection at all, because obviously the trauma possibly contributed. And for a while, I was obsessed in trying to remember this dream that seemed very important. And then realization that I had probably fallen because I was careless and overworking. I probably need a holiday. I never took any holidays. Or my boss said, you need to take a holiday. I said, okay, fine. I'll take some holiday. How many days I have available? 23. Okay. I'll go to an island somewhere, isolated, for 23 days. And I'll try to remember the dream. That's the thing I'm going to do. So I don't have any distractions, no connection with anything or anybody, and I try to remember the dream. And I try to find an island, and I find one in Scotland in winter, which is completely dark at 2 in the afternoon. So, and I spent 23 days in isolation in this. And while I was there, I remembered the dream, and I wrote a novel. And a novel is called The Demon's Trial, in which is novel, but is autobiographical, in which I am the demon that has been put on trial about the ghost of the animals I failed. And while I wrote it, was a cathartic moment. I put all my inconsistencies on the table, including trying to help one animal but eating another, trying to help another animal but wearing another. So I came back from the island as an ethical vegan. So I went as a meat eater 33 days after knocking the head, and came back as a vegan. So you might say that perhaps it's all a dream of things happened to me and I'm still in a coma somewhere from that knocking the head. But I immediately became an ethical vegan, and then all the remaining jobs I did in animal protection were as a vegan, and very proud vegan. All these t-shirts, this is not an accidental thing, I have about 120 vegan t-shirts, and there's always something vegan on my body. So even if I'm sleeping in a bus, I'm campaigning, so people look at me and they say we're vegan. It terrifies me, the idea that somebody might look at me and might think I might not be a vegan. So I want to be sure. Back to that part of the story, when I joined the monkeys, the League Against Cruel Sports, the second time I was the head of policy and research. When they enroll you, as you know, in any new organization now, by law, you have to be enrolled into a pension fund. That's how it works. So the company chooses a pension fund, and then that's the one they give it to you. As a vegan, everyone that somebody gives me something, the first thing I do is check where that comes from, is there an animal product? So even if they give you a pension, I have to check it. So I wanted to check where the money was invested, because when you get the money when you retire, but between now and the moment you retire, the 6 or whatever percentage of your salary goes to that pension fund, and they use it. They invest in nothing. I wanted to know this 6% of my money, where it was going. And I found out it was going to the worst possible companies for a vegan. Pharmaceutical companies that test on animals, petrol companies, tobacco companies, the worst possible companies. I cannot believe it, because I was a League Against Cruel Sports, an animal welfare organization. And I remember the first time I worked 10 years before, they had a pension fund, and that didn't invest in all this. Something happened in between. So I went to my bosses and I said, what's going on? I don't want my pension fund to be like that. And they all seemed surprised. They said, oh, well, that's the previous management. We'll change it. Don't worry. We'll find a way to change it. And I said, well, fine, but don't put any of my percentage of my salary now until you change it. Hold it, and then you can put it later. And months passed, and I keep pushing it, and then I discovered that they didn't hold my 6%. I was invested against my will, and I keep pushing. Yeah, we'll solve it. The change manager and new manager came in. Eventually, I decided to change the pension fund myself, because you can, anytime you can change. The law only says that you have to have one, doesn't tell you that, doesn't force you to take the one that the employer chose. So I changed it to one that was ethical, that had the label ethical, although it's not perfect, it's never perfect, it was that good enough. And then I told all my vegan colleagues of the league how to do it if they wanted to do it, because they had the same issue. And they fired me. They fired me for having raised the issue and having told my colleagues. And I cannot believe it. I was shocked. I was just doing what a vegan would do. And then I realized, oh, I've been fired for being a vegan because I just did what a vegan would do. So I went to a lawyer. I said, look, this is what happened to me. Surely veganism is protected. Surely you cannot be discriminated for following your belief. He said, veganism is not protected, but it can be. It's not yet protected, but it can be, because the Equality Act does mention something that says religious beliefs are protected, but non-religious beliefs too. It uses the term philosophical beliefs. But for a philosophical belief to be protected, it has to go through a different process in which a judge had to check that belief against a series of characteristics, and only if all of them are fulfilled, then that belief is protected. If not, that belief is rejected. Nobody had done this with veganism before. I was going to be the first. And he said, if you try to do that, two things could happen. The judge says, no, this is not protected, and then all vegans will hate you forever, because from that point onwards, veganism will never be protected. Or, if you're successful, all vegans will love you. Well, you didn't use that word. But they will not hate you forever, essentially. They will hate you less. But who knows whether you're going to get it. And I said, well, okay, let's go for it. Because that was a bad thing happened to me. That can become a very good thing for everyone. And I asked my lawyer, okay, how much you charge me for what's your fee? And then he told me, and then I went home, fuck. I can't afford this. It's impossible. I can't get it. And then thinking about it, and how can I do it? And then the lawyer himself said, recognizing that I was not calling back, he said, you can crowdfund for it. You can get a crowdfunding for your legal fees. There's actually a system already. It's called crowd justice, specifically for this sort of things. You could try that. And I realized, okay, I'm a campaigner. I do campaigns. I can do that. So rather than campaign for the subject of closing a zoo, let's campaign to get money to pay my lawyer. And that's when a 2 years litigation process with campaigning started, and ended up with, in January 2020, with a judge saying, looking at my 1,400 pages of evidence, I'm autistic, of course, it had to be more than 1,000 pages. And there were 2 days of that pre-trial, or this a pre-hearing is called, to determine whether the veganism is protected, and if it is, then the legal case continues afterwards in a full merits hearing. So, in the pre-hearing, it was 2 days. The first day, the judge says, look, I have to read you 1,400 pages. I need the entire day only for that. So the second day is the day I had to give testimony and all my witnesses. And the judge didn't ask any questions, and nobody asked any questions. And normally, in employment tribunals, when the whole thing ends, the judge goes away, and 2 weeks later, you receive a written judgment. And he said, no, yesterday you convinced me already when I read you 1,000 pages. I already know. You don't have to wait. And the area was full of press from everywhere in the world, because people already knew that was the first attempt ever in the world to do this. So there was packed with journalists, so the judge knew that. He said, look, I can tell you straight away. You don't have to wait. I'll give you a written judgment, but I can tell you straight away. And he said, I feel that each and every condition was overwhelmingly fulfilled. And he recognized veganism as a protected philosophical belief under the Equality Act 2010. And since then, anybody that follows the same type of veganism that I follow is protected. Which is the type I follow? Because I could have chosen any very obscure type, and only that can be protected. And my definition is the official definition of veganism of the vegan society. So I chose what vegan is defined officially by the vegan society. So anybody that follows the official definition of veganism of the vegan society is defined now by law as an ethical vegan, and you are equally protected of all the things I said initially. If you just have vegan food, and that's the only thing you do, you're not an ethical vegan, protection doesn't apply to you. Accidentally, if you're vegetarian, you cannot be protected either, because somebody else did the same I did months before. They were a vegetarian, and the judge said no. Vegetarian doesn't have one of the conditions, that is, it needs to be coherent, and vegetarianism is not coherent. But it was the same judge that did both cases. And I was lucky because I got a good judge. And when I listened to the first judgment of the first case of the vegetarian, in his reading, he said something along the line of, it's not that vegetarians are like the vegans. And then I immediately thought, he knows the difference. He understands. This is a good judge. He's not going to get confused with this. And he was certainly a good judge. And now you can see my case in legal books, in universities. They teach it. It's the only case. It's the archetypal case of a philosophical non-religious belief to be protected. And then that's how made me as a writer. And what happens is when I wrote the book explaining all this, people like the way I write. And people started to approach and say, can you write something for us? We'll give you this money. We'll just pay you for this. And many vegan organizations and animal protection organizations, they hire me as a freelancer to write things about veganism and about animals. And I didn't think much about it until I realized I don't need to do anything else. I have enough clients now to do this for a living. And I've been, since 2020, since the publication of my book, I've been doing this for a living. All my money I got is from writing articles about veganism by several clients. I have written more than 2,600 articles already since. And it is about an average now of one and a half article of mine is published every single day, Saturdays and Sundays, since 2021. So
Wow.
I am a writer. I do it all the time. To the point that I thought I could get some of my articles and create a new book. So the second book, which is published this year, is a companion of some of the articles I've written about why we reject the things we reject, why we reject leather, why we reject honey. So each of the chapters is all the explanations with all the angles from the environmental, the animal rights, whatever, with all the reference, because the first book is not a reference book. And I thought, I need to write a reference book that you can read in any order. You can use it when you want to answer a question why you don't do this. And it goes deep into the philosophy of veganism. I started talking about the philosophy in the first book, and that inspired me to go deeper. So all my articles I published since, they are really things I started with my first book, and I went deeper and deeper. And the first chapters of Why Vegans Don't is really going deep into the principles, the core principles of the philosophy of veganism. Once you understand the principles, and you understand why we reject the things. So it's a perfect book for people that are new to veganism, because then you have a good reason to understand why we reject things, but also because I deal with all the gray areas, all the things that not all the vegans agree, and I give my opinion why or not. So also to resolve the conflicts that you might still have, or the things that you're not sure. And so that is my second book. And if you get them both today, you get it for cheap price, you'll get the entire story that I just told you today with details of my legal case, of how I become a vegan, how veganism became a vegan, and then the deep down of the philosophy of veganism, and then the practicalities of why we reject each and every of the things that we do. And that's it. Thank you very much.